My sister Emma had been stealing from our father's business for 3 years, but what she didn't know was that every transaction left a digital footprint. She thought she'd covered her tracks perfectly, especially after Dad passed away last month. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. So when she demanded I sign over my half of the inheritance to her, claiming I wasn't family material, and threatening to expose some embarrassing photos from my college days, I couldn't help but laugh. I said, "Emma, I appreciate the blackmail attempt, but I really can't take you seriously when you're wearing Dad's old construction helmet to a lawyer's meeting. And threatening me with photos of me drunk at a frat party? Even a rookie attorney wouldn't fall for that." Looking at the pristine conference table in Marcus Chen's law office on 16th Street, with Emma sitting across from me wearing our father's yellow hard hat like some sort of crown, I knew we were in for another one of her theatrical performances. This was already the 15th meeting we'd had since Dad's funeral 3 weeks ago, and every single time, Emma came up with a new reason why she deserved the entire Morrison Construction empire. All of this drama started because our father, Robert Morrison, had built something extraordinary from nothing. What began as a one-man roofing operation in 1985 had grown into Denver's most trusted construction company, responsible for building half the commercial district and countless residential developments throughout Colorado. Dad had poured 40 years of his life into Morrison Construction, working 18-hour days, missing family dinners, and sacrificing everything to create a legacy worth $2.3 million. The will was crystal clear. Emma and I were to inherit equal shares of everything: the business, the family house on Maple Ridge Drive, the mountain cabin in Aspen, and all associated assets. But Emma had other plans. She'd been Dad's golden child her entire life, the one who could do no wrong, the daughter who supposedly understood the family vision better than anyone else. Dad had always favored her, giving her every opportunity, paying for her MBA from Northwestern, and treating her like the heir apparent to his construction throne. What Dad never realized was that Emma saw Morrison Construction not as a legacy to preserve, but as a cash cow to milk dry. At first, I tried to be reasonable about Emma's demands. I genuinely believed that maybe we could work together, that family meant something to her, beyond dollar signs. I suggested we could run the company as equal partners, split the profits fairly, and honor Dad's memory by continuing his work. I even offered to let her take the lead on major decisions, since she had the business degree and more experience with the corporate side of operations. But Emma's appetite for control was insatiable. She wanted everything, and she wanted it immediately. Her arguments became increasingly desperate and manipulative. First, she claimed that Dad had verbally promised her the entire business before he died, though she conveniently had no witnesses or documentation to support this claim. Then she insisted that because she had worked at the company for 5 years while I pursued my career as a software engineer, she deserved a larger share of the inheritance. When those tactics failed, Emma escalated to personal attacks. She hired a private investigator to dig up embarrassing information about my past, convinced that she could find something scandalous enough to blackmail me into submission. The best she could manage were some photos from my college fraternity days, showing me drunk at parties and a few speeding tickets from my 20s. Her threats were laughable, but they revealed the depths of her desperation. The worst part was watching her manipulate everyone around us. Emma had a gift for presenting herself as the victim, the responsible daughter who was simply trying to protect the family business from her irresponsible brother. She spread rumors throughout Denver's construction community that I was planning to sell Morrison Construction to corporate competitors, that I had no respect for Dad's legacy, and that I was motivated purely by greed. She even convinced several of Dad's old friends that I was the problem. At the funeral reception, I overheard Emma telling our neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, that I had only come back to Denver for the money, that I had never really cared about the family business, and that Dad would have wanted her to have full control. The lies came so naturally to her that I sometimes wondered if she actually believed them herself. What Emma didn't realize was that I had been quietly investigating her activities for months before Dad's death. Something about the company's financial statements hadn't made sense during my last visit home for Christmas. Revenue was strong, contracts were flowing in steadily, but the profit margins seemed unusually thin for a business of Morrison Construction's reputation and scope. At first, I attributed the financial inconsistencies to the normal fluctuations of the construction industry. Material costs had risen significantly over the past few years, labor was becoming more expensive, and competition from larger firms was intensifying. But the more I studied the numbers, the more suspicious I became. Certain expenses seemed inflated, some vendor relationships appeared questionable, and there were regular cash withdrawals that didn't correspond to any legitimate business purpose. During Dad's final weeks in the hospital, while Emma was supposedly managing the day-to-day operations of Morrison Construction, I started conducting my own investigation. I reached out to some of Dad's most trusted employees, carefully asking questions about recent changes in company procedures, new vendors, and any unusual financial activities they might have noticed. What I discovered was a pattern of systematic theft that had been ongoing for nearly 3 years. Emma had been creating fake vendor accounts, inflating material costs, and diverting funds into personal accounts that she thought no one would ever trace. She'd been careful to keep the individual transactions small enough to avoid triggering automatic audit flags, but the cumulative amount was staggering. The digital trail was extensive and damning. Every fraudulent invoice, every false expense report, every diverted payment had left electronic evidence that painted a clear picture of embezzlement. Emma had stolen over $400,000 from Morrison Construction, money that should have gone toward employee bonuses, equipment upgrades, and expanding the business that Dad had worked so hard to build. But Emma had no idea that I knew about any of this. She continued her campaign to claim the entire inheritance, growing more aggressive and desperate with each passing day. Her latest strategy involved threatening to destroy Dad's reputation posthumously, claiming she would reveal family secrets that would tarnish the Morrison name throughout Denver's business community. The irony was overwhelming. Emma was demanding that I hand over my inheritance while simultaneously stealing from the very business that generated that wealth. She was positioning herself as the rightful heir to Dad's legacy, while actively destroying everything he had built. Her audacity was matched only by her complete lack of awareness regarding the evidence I had compiled against her. As I sat in Marcus Chen's office for the 15th time, watching Emma fidget with Dad's hard hat and prepare to deliver another ultimatum, I knew that this charade had gone on long enough. She had crossed too many lines, hurt too many people, and disrespected Dad's memory one too many times. The moment had come to reveal the truth and let the consequences fall where they may. Marcus cleared his throat and opened his briefcase, preparing to mediate another round of what he probably thought was a typical family inheritance dispute. He had no idea that he was about to witness something far more dramatic than siblings arguing over money. He couldn't have imagined that within the next hour, his quiet law office would become the center of a criminal investigation that would send shockwaves through Denver's construction industry. Emma smoothed down her jacket and put on her most sincere expression, the same manipulative smile she had perfected over years of getting her way through charm and deception. She had no clue that her carefully constructed web of lies was about to collapse entirely, or that the brother she had underestimated for so long was finally ready to fight back. The document I carried in my jacket pocket would change everything. It wasn't just evidence of Emma's crimes, though it certainly contained that. It was proof of something much larger and more dangerous. Something that connected Morrison Construction to activities that went far beyond simple embezzlement. The paper Emma was about to see would not only end her dreams of inheriting Dad's empire, but would also bring federal investigators racing to our doorstep. I checked my watch and smiled calmly at Emma, letting her believe for just a few more minutes that she still held all the cards. Soon enough, she would learn that some games have consequences far more serious than losing money, and that family loyalty has limits that she had crossed long ago. The meeting was about to begin, and Emma had no idea that it would be her last day of freedom for a very long time. 7 years ago, Emma saved my relationship with our father when I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. That autumn, I had just graduated from Colorado State University with a computer science degree and a job offer from a tech startup in Silicon Valley. The salary was incredible, the stock options looked promising, and I was ready to leave Denver forever. convinced that the family construction business was beneath my newly acquired expertise in software development. Dad and I had gotten into a massive fight about my decision to move to California. He couldn't understand why I would abandon the family legacy for what he called playing with computers all day. I was young, arrogant, and convinced that I was destined for something bigger than Morrison Construction. The argument escalated until Dad told me that if I left for Silicon Valley, I shouldn't bother coming back for family holidays. I was packing my apartment, ready to burn bridges and start fresh on the West Coast, when Emma showed up at my door with a stack of financial documents and a bottle of Dad's favorite whiskey. She sat me down at my kitchen table and walked me through the real numbers behind Morrison Construction, showing me growth projections, profit margins, and expansion opportunities that I had never bothered to understand. More importantly, Emma showed me what the business meant to Dad beyond just money. She had compiled a photo album of every major project Morrison Construction had completed, along with thank you letters from families whose homes Dad had built, testimonials from business owners whose commercial properties had stood strong through Colorado's harsh weather.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
And newspaper clippings celebrating the company's role in Denver's development boom. Emma helped me see that Dad wasn't just asking me to join a construction company. He was offering me the chance to continue building the community where we had grown up, to create something lasting that would benefit generations of Colorado families. She convinced me that my technology skills could revolutionize the construction industry if I applied them within the family business, rather than abandoning it entirely. That night, Emma and I called Dad together and worked out a compromise. I would take the Silicon Valley job for 2 years to gain experience and build up savings, but then I would return to Denver and help modernize Morrison Construction's operations. Dad agreed to the plan, and Emma promised to hold down the fort until I came back. The tech startup turned out to be everything I had hoped for and more. I learned cutting-edge project management software, developed expertise in digital communication platforms, and gained valuable experience working with venture capital funding. But more importantly, those 2 years in California gave me perspective on what really mattered in life. The startup culture was fast-paced and exciting, but it lacked the sense of purpose and community connection that I had grown up with in Denver. When I returned to Colorado in 2019, Emma had kept her word. Morrison Construction was thriving under her management, and she had successfully maintained all of Dad's key client relationships while expanding into new market segments. She had earned her MBA while working full-time, demonstrated genuine leadership skills, and proven that she understood both the business and operational sides of the construction industry. Dad was incredibly proud of both of us. He loved telling customers about his daughter, who had transformed the company's administrative systems, and his son, who was bringing cutting-edge technology to traditional construction processes. For the first time in our lives, Emma and I felt like true partners, rather than competitors for Dad's approval. I threw myself into updating Morrison Construction's technology infrastructure. I implemented new project management systems that allowed us to track multiple construction sites simultaneously, developed customer relationship software that helped us maintain better communication with clients, and created digital planning tools that reduced material waste and improved project efficiency. Emma and I worked together seamlessly during those early years. She handled client relationships, contract negotiations, and financial planning, while I focused on operational efficiency, technology integration, and quality control systems. Dad gradually stepped back from day-to-day management, confident that his children had the skills and dedication necessary to continue his legacy. The partnership seemed perfect until Marcus Chen joined the company as our legal counsel and business advisor in early 2022. Marcus brought sophisticated financial strategies and expansion opportunities that Dad had never considered. He suggested that Morrison Construction could grow much faster by taking on larger commercial projects, partnering with national developers, and potentially franchising our successful business model to other markets. Emma was immediately fascinated by Marcus's vision for aggressive growth. She started spending long hours in strategy meetings with him, developing plans for expanding Morrison Construction beyond Colorado into surrounding states. Their conversations increasingly focused on maximizing short-term profits, rather than maintaining the steady, sustainable growth that had been Dad's approach for 4 decades. I was more cautious about rapid expansion. Having worked in the volatile tech industry, I understood how quickly ambitious growth plans could collapse if market conditions changed, or if companies overextended themselves financially. I preferred Dad's conservative approach of building slowly, maintaining high-quality standards, and prioritizing long-term stability over flashy profits. The disagreement created tension between Emma and me for the first time since I had returned from California. She accused me of being too risk-averse and lacking vision for the company's potential. I worried that she was being influenced by Marcus's aggressive strategies, without fully considering the potential downsides of rapid expansion. Dad tried to mediate our disagreements, but his health was beginning to decline. He had developed cardiovascular problems that required regular medical monitoring, and the stress of family conflict was clearly affecting his recovery. Emma and I both backed down from our arguments out of concern for Dad's well-being, but the underlying tension about the company's direction remained unresolved. Looking back, I realized that this was when Emma began making financial decisions without consulting me or Dad. She started authorizing larger expenses, pursuing more aggressive marketing campaigns, and taking on projects that stretched our resources thin. At the time, I attributed these choices to her MBA training and her desire to prove herself as a business leader. Emma also began working more closely with Marcus on what she called strategic initiatives that required confidentiality until they were fully developed. She would disappear for long lunches and afternoon meetings, claiming she was exploring new partnership opportunities or negotiating potential acquisitions. Dad and I trusted her judgment and didn't question the secrecy, assuming that competitive business planning sometimes required discretion. The first red flag should have been when Emma insisted on taking over the company's financial reporting responsibilities. She convinced Dad that her MBA coursework had given her expertise in advanced accounting principles that would help Morrison Construction optimize its tax strategies and improve profit margins. Dad was impressed by her initiative and gradually delegated more financial oversight to her. I was too focused on the technical side of operations to pay close attention to the financial details. Emma presented quarterly reports that showed steady growth and healthy cash flow, so I had no reason to suspect that anything was wrong. The numbers looked good, our clients were satisfied, and the company seemed to be thriving under Emma's business leadership. What I didn't realize was that Emma had started creating a parallel set of financial records. The reports she showed Dad and me reflected legitimate business transactions and accurate profit calculations. But she was also maintaining a separate system that tracked additional income streams and expense categories that never appeared in our official documentation. Emma had discovered that Morrison Construction's reputation and established vendor relationships could be leveraged for activities that went far beyond traditional construction services. Certain clients were willing to pay premium rates for expedited permits, flexible inspection schedules, and discreet handling of regulatory compliance issues. Marcus had introduced her to a network of developers and property investors who valued Morrison Construction's ability to navigate Denver's bureaucratic processes efficiently. The extra income from these consulting services was substantial, but it existed in a gray area between legitimate business practices and regulatory violations. Emma convinced herself that she was simply maximizing the company's earning potential by capitalizing on Dad's decades of relationship building within Denver's construction and development community. At first, Emma probably intended to share this additional income with the family once she had fully developed the business model and ensured its sustainability. But the money was too tempting, and the secrecy made it easy to rationalize keeping the profits for herself. She started viewing the extra income as compensation for her business development efforts rather than as company revenue that should be distributed according to ownership shares. Marcus encouraged Emma's independent financial management, suggesting that rapid growth required flexible decision-making that couldn't be slowed down by family consultation processes. He helped her establish separate business accounts and develop sophisticated documentation systems that made the parallel financial activities appear legitimate to casual inspection. By the time Dad's health crisis began in late 2023, Emma had been operating her financial schemes for nearly 2 years. She had grown comfortable with the deception and confident that her activities would never be discovered. The additional income had funded her lifestyle upgrades, financed her graduate education expenses, and provided a substantial personal savings account that she considered her reward for growing the family business. Dad's illness created additional opportunities for Emma to expand her financial independence. As he spent more time in medical appointments and recovery periods, Emma gained greater autonomy over day-to-day business decisions. She convinced Dad that the stress of detailed financial oversight was harmful to his health, encouraging him to trust her management while he focused on getting better. I was also distracted during Dad's illness, splitting my time between supporting his medical care and maintaining our technology systems. Emma skillfully managed our family dynamics to ensure that neither Dad nor I had time or energy to conduct detailed financial audits. She presented herself as the responsible daughter who was protecting Dad from business stress while maintaining company operations during a difficult period. The final months of Dad's life were dominated by medical concerns and family time, rather than business planning. Emma made sure that our focus remained on Dad's comfort and our relationships with each other, rather than on financial details or operational oversight. She was loving, supportive, and seemingly devoted to Dad's well-being during his final weeks. When Dad passed away peacefully in his sleep last month, Emma was holding his hand. She had been the perfect daughter throughout his illness, managing both his medical care and the business responsibilities with apparent selflessness and dedication. Dad's final words to her were expressions of pride and gratitude for everything she had done for the family. The funeral was beautiful, attended by hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Dad's work and generosity. Emma delivered a moving eulogy that celebrated Dad's legacy and promised to continue his commitment to building strong communities throughout Colorado. Everyone who heard her speech was convinced that Morrison Construction would thrive under her leadership. But now, sitting in Marcus Chen's law office 3 weeks after the funeral, I was beginning to understand that Emma's Perfect Daughter Act had been covering up years of systematic theft and deception. The financial irregularities I had noticed were just the tip of an iceberg that included fraud, embezzlement, and potentially much more serious criminal activities. Emma had no idea that I had been investigating her activities, or that I possessed documentation proving her guilt. She continued to assume that her charm and manipulation would be sufficient to convince me to sign over my inheritance rights. Her confidence in her ability to deceive me was about to be shattered in spectacular fashion. The paper folded in my jacket pocket contained evidence that would not only expose Emma's financial crimes, but would also reveal connections to a much larger criminal network. Marcus Chen's role in the scheme was more significant than I had initially realized, and the activities they had been conducting through Morrison Construction had attracted the attention of federal law enforcement agencies. Within the next few minutes, Emma's world was going to collapse completely. The sister who had once saved my relationship with our father was about to discover that family loyalty had limits, and that some betrayals carried consequences far more serious than losing an inheritance dispute. Marcus Chen cleared his throat and opened the meeting with his usual professional demeanor, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. He knew this inheritance dispute had dragged on far longer than necessary, and Emma's increasingly desperate tactics were making him uncomfortable. What Marcus didn't realize was that his discomfort was about to become the least of his problems. Emma launched into her prepared presentation immediately, pulling out a folder thick with documents that she claimed proved her exclusive right to inherit Morrison Construction. She had spent weeks preparing this final ultimatum, convinced that overwhelming me with paperwork and legal threats would force me to capitulate. Her confidence was absolute as she spread contracts, financial projections, and character references across the conference table. Her first argument focused on what she called sweat equity in the family business. Emma claimed that her 5 years of full-time work at Morrison Construction, combined with her MBA education and business development efforts, had created value far exceeding the 50-50 split outlined in Dad's will. She presented calculations showing that her contributions had increased the company's worth by at least $800,000, money that should rightfully belong to her rather than being shared equally. The second part of Emma's presentation involved detailed criticism of my commitment to the family business. She argued that my 2 years in Silicon Valley demonstrated a fundamental lack of loyalty to Dad's vision, and that my focus on technology rather than traditional construction practices showed that I didn't understand or respect the industry that had built our family's wealth. According to Emma, Dad had only included me in the will out of obligation, not because he truly believed I deserved an equal share. Emma's third strategy was emotional manipulation disguised as family history. She recounted story after story of her childhood dedication to Morrison Construction, describing how she had spent weekends at construction sites, learned to read blueprints before she could drive, and always known that she wanted to continue Dad's legacy. She painted herself as the natural heir who had earned her inheritance through decades of devotion, while portraying me as an outsider who had returned only for financial gain. The final element of Emma's presentation was the threat that had become her signature move over the past 3 weeks. She claimed to possess information that would destroy my reputation and career if I didn't voluntarily relinquish my inheritance rights. The manila envelope she placed on the table supposedly contained evidence of serious character flaws that would make me unfit to inherit Dad's business. Marcus looked increasingly uncomfortable as Emma's presentation grew more aggressive and personal. He had signed up to mediate a family inheritance dispute, not to facilitate what was essentially an extortion attempt. His professional ethics were clearly being tested by Emma's tactics, but he seemed unsure how to intervene without overstepping his role as neutral counsel. I listened to Emma's entire presentation without interrupting, maintaining calm eye contact and occasionally nodding as if I were seriously considering her arguments. My apparent receptiveness encouraged her to become even more confident and detailed in her demands. She was so focused on her performance that she failed to notice the subtle changes in Marcus's body language that suggested he knew more about this situation than Emma realized. When Emma finally finished her presentation, she leaned back in her chair with a satisfied smile and waited for my response. She clearly expected me to either accept her demands immediately or attempt to negotiate for a smaller share of the inheritance. What she didn't expect was for me to reach into my jacket pocket and place a single sheet of paper on the conference table between us. The document I revealed was a bank statement from an account that Emma thought no one else knew existed. The account that had received over $400,000 in diverted funds from Morrison Construction over the past 3 years. The account that connected Emma's embezzlement to a much larger money laundering operation that Marcus had been facilitating through his law firm. Emma's face went completely white as she recognized the bank routing numbers and account details. Her confident smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pure panic as she realized that her carefully constructed web of lies had been exposed. She reached for the document with trembling hands, but I pulled it back before she could grab it. Marcus Chen's reaction was even more dramatic. He started to stand up from his chair, then sat back down heavily, as if his legs had suddenly given out. The color drained from his face as he realized that the inheritance meeting he thought he was mediating had become something entirely different. He began shuffling papers nervously, clearly trying to figure out how much I knew and what his legal exposure might be. Emma tried to recover her composure, but her voice was shaking as she attempted to explain away the bank statement. She claimed that the account was for legitimate business purposes, that she had been saving money for company expansion projects, and that she had always intended to report the funds properly once her business development initiatives were complete. Her explanations were desperate and contradictory, making it obvious that she was improvising rather than presenting a coherent defense. I let Emma stumble through her explanations for several minutes before interrupting her with a simple question that changed everything. I asked her if she wanted to know how federal investigators had first become interested in Morrison Construction's financial activities. The question hit Emma like a physical blow, because it revealed that the scope of my knowledge extended far beyond the bank statement I had just shown her. Marcus Chen made his first significant mistake at that moment. Instead of maintaining his professional neutrality, he blurted out a question asking how long I had been working with federal investigators. His panicked response confirmed that he knew exactly what activities Emma and he had been conducting, and that he understood the serious legal implications of their schemes. Emma's panic escalated as she realized that Marcus's reaction had essentially confirmed their guilt. She started demanding to know who I had been talking to, what evidence I possessed, and what I intended to do with the information. Her questions were frantic and disorganized, revealing that she had never developed a contingency plan for the possibility that her crimes might be discovered. I calmly explained that Morrison Construction's unusual financial patterns had attracted attention during a broader federal investigation into construction industry money laundering in the Denver metropolitan area. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had been monitoring suspicious transactions involving several local construction companies, and Morrison Construction's activities had triggered multiple red flags in their automated surveillance systems. The federal investigation had initially focused on a different construction firm, but Morrison Construction's connections to that company through shared vendors and subcontractors had brought us into the scope of their inquiry. Emma's parallel financial system had created exactly the kind of transaction patterns that federal algorithms were designed to detect, and her attempts to hide the money trail had actually made it more visible to sophisticated law enforcement analysis. Emma and Marcus had unknowingly been operating under federal surveillance for over 6 months. Their meetings had been photographed, their communications had been monitored, and their financial transactions had been tracked in real time. The federal investigators had been building a comprehensive case against their money laundering network while waiting for the right moment to make arrests. My role in the federal investigation had begun when FBI agents approached me 3 months ago with questions about Morrison Construction's financial activities. They had identified me as a potential witness who might have knowledge of irregular business practices, and they had offered me immunity in exchange for cooperation with their investigation. Initially, I had been as shocked as Emma was now to learn about the crimes being committed through our family business. The federal agents had provided me with sophisticated financial analysis software and investigative techniques that allowed me to trace Emma's embezzlement activities in detail. What I had discovered was far more extensive than simple theft from the family business. Emma and Marcus had been using Morrison Construction as a front for laundering money from drug trafficking operations, illegal gambling enterprises, and various other criminal activities throughout the Rocky Mountain region. The bank statement I had shown Emma was just one piece of evidence in a federal case file that contained hundreds of pages of documentation. The FBI had been preparing to execute search warrants and make arrests for several weeks, but they had agreed to delay their actions until after this inheritance meeting. They wanted to give Emma one final opportunity to confess and cooperate before facing the full consequences of her criminal activities. Emma's reaction to learning about the federal investigation was exactly what the FBI agents had predicted. Instead of accepting responsibility for her crimes or attempting to negotiate a plea agreement, she became increasingly desperate and irrational. She accused me of betraying the family, claimed that I was motivated by jealousy and greed, and threatened to destroy evidence that could implicate other people in her criminal network. Marcus Chen tried to maintain his professional composure, but his legal training made him acutely aware of the serious federal charges he was facing. Money laundering convictions typically carried sentences of 10 to 20 years in federal prison, and the evidence I had described sounded comprehensive enough to support successful prosecutions. His attempts to minimize his involvement or shift blame to Emma were transparent and pathetic. The most revealing moment came when Emma demanded to know what would happen to Morrison Construction if she was arrested. Her question revealed that even in the face of federal criminal charges, her primary concern was maintaining control over the family business, rather than accepting responsibility for her actions or considering the impact of her crimes on other people. I explained that Morrison Construction would continue operating under court supervision while the federal investigation was completed. The legitimate aspects of the business would be preserved, but all financial activities would be monitored by federal officials until the money laundering prosecution was resolved. Dad's legacy would survive, but Emma would have no role in the company's future. Emma's final desperate move was to threaten me with the manila envelope she had brought to the meeting. She claimed that exposing her crimes would also destroy my reputation, since I had been involved in Morrison Construction's operations during the period when the money laundering had occurred. Her threat was empty and illogical, but it demonstrated how completely she had lost touch with reality. Marcus Chen was frantically trying to calculate his legal options when I revealed the final piece of information that ended any possibility of negotiation or compromise. I told them that federal agents were positioned outside the law office at that very moment, waiting for my signal to enter and begin making arrests. The meeting they thought was about inheritance disputes was actually the final phase of a federal money laundering investigation. Emma's world collapsed entirely when she realized that her arrest was imminent and inevitable. Years of careful planning, manipulation, and deception had led to this moment where she had no escape options, and no one left to blame except herself. The sister who had once saved my relationship with our father was about to face the consequences of betraying everything our family had built. The silence in Marcus Chen's conference room was deafening, as Emma and Marcus absorbed the reality of their situation. I could see Emma's mind racing as she tried to process the fact that federal agents were waiting outside, that her crimes had been discovered months ago, and that the inheritance meeting she had orchestrated was actually her final moment of freedom. Marcus was the first to break the silence, his legal training kicking in despite his obvious panic. He asked me directly what kind of deal the federal investigators might be willing to offer in exchange for cooperation. His question revealed that he understood the overwhelming strength of the evidence against them and was already thinking about damage control rather than denial. Emma's reaction was completely different. Instead of considering cooperation or plea negotiations, she became increasingly frantic and desperate. She started demanding that I call off the federal investigation, claiming that family loyalty should override legal obligations. Her pleas were emotional and irrational, demonstrating that she still didn't understand the severity of her situation or the impossibility of stopping a federal prosecution that had been months in the making. I explained to both of them that my cooperation with the FBI had been voluntary and that I had no authority to influence their investigative decisions or prosecution strategies. The federal agents had built their case methodically and professionally, following evidence wherever it led without regard for family relationships or personal considerations. Emma's crimes had triggered an investigation that was now completely beyond anyone's ability to control or stop. The most heartbreaking moment came when Emma asked me why I hadn't confronted her privately about the financial irregularities before involving federal investigators. She seemed genuinely unable to understand that her theft and money laundering activities were serious crimes, rather than family disputes that could be resolved through conversation and compromise. I reminded Emma that she had been stealing from Morrison Construction for 3 years, while presenting herself as the devoted daughter who was protecting Dad's legacy. She had manipulated Dad during his final illness, lied to me consistently about company finances, and used our family business as a front for criminal activities that could have destroyed everything Dad had worked to build. Her betrayal had been systematic and deliberate, far beyond anything that could be forgiven or forgotten. Emma's response revealed the depth of her self-deception and entitlement. She actually argued that her theft was justified because she had been working harder than anyone else to grow the business, and that the additional income she had generated through Marcus's network more than compensated for the money she had diverted to personal accounts. She seemed to believe that her business development efforts gave her the right to unilaterally change the ownership structure of Morrison Construction. Marcus Chen tried to distance himself from Emma's more extreme statements, but his nervous behavior made it clear that he was deeply involved in the money laundering operation. His attempts to minimize his role or claim ignorance about the criminal nature of their activities were unconvincing and desperate. The federal investigators had documented his participation extensively, and his panicked reactions were confirming his guilt rather than establishing his innocence. The conversation was interrupted when my phone buzzed with a text message from FBI Special Agent Sarah Rodriguez, who was leading the investigation. The message was simple: "Ready when you are." I showed the message to Emma and Marcus, letting them know that their arrest was imminent unless they chose to cooperate immediately with the federal investigation. Emma made one final attempt to manipulate the situation by threatening to claim that I had been complicit in her criminal activities. She suggested that my knowledge of Morrison Construction's operations made me a co-conspirator, and that exposing her crimes would also implicate me in federal charges. Her threat was legally baseless and obviously desperate, but it revealed how completely she had abandoned any pretense of family loyalty or personal responsibility. I responded to Emma's threat by explaining that the FBI had already cleared me of any criminal involvement after extensive interviews and financial analysis. My cooperation with the investigation had been voluntary and complete, and federal agents had confirmed that I had no knowledge of Emma's crimes until they approached me 3 months ago. Her attempt to drag me down with her was futile and vindictive. Marcus Chen finally accepted the reality of his situation and asked specific questions about federal sentencing guidelines for money laundering convictions. His legal training made him understand that cooperation with federal investigators was his only hope for minimizing his prison sentence. But he was clearly terrified about the consequences of betraying the criminal network that had provided him with substantial illegal income. Emma was still refusing to accept responsibility for her actions when I decided that the meeting had accomplished its purpose. I sent a text message to Agent Rodriguez confirming that Emma and Marcus had been informed about the federal investigation and that they were aware of the evidence against them. The time for negotiation and discussion had ended. Agent Rodriguez responded immediately, indicating that federal agents would enter the building within 5 minutes to execute arrest warrants for both Emma and Marcus. I informed them that their arrests were about to begin and advised them to remain calm and comply with federal agents' instructions. The inheritance dispute that had brought us to Marcus's office was about to become the least of their concerns. Emma's final words before the agents arrived were a mixture of rage, desperation, and disbelief. She accused me of destroying the family, betraying Dad's memory, and choosing money over blood relationships. Her accusations were ironic, given that she had been the one stealing from the family business and using Dad's legacy as a cover for criminal activities. But her complete lack of self-awareness was consistent with the narcissistic behavior she had displayed throughout her life. Marcus Chen spent the final minutes before his arrest frantically shredding documents and deleting files from his computer. His panicked attempts to destroy evidence were futile since federal agents had been monitoring his activities for months and had already secured copies of all relevant documentation. His desperate behavior was simply confirming his guilt and potentially adding obstruction of justice charges to his already extensive legal problems. The sound of multiple vehicles arriving outside the law office building signaled that the federal operation was beginning. I could see Emma's hands shaking as she realized that this was really happening, that her arrest was imminent, and that her life as she knew it was about to end permanently. The confident, manipulative woman who had entered the meeting expecting to claim her inheritance was about to be handcuffed and charged with serious federal crimes. Agent Rodriguez entered the conference room first, followed by 3 other federal agents and 2 local police officers. Their professional demeanor and efficient coordination made it clear that this was a well-planned operation, rather than a spontaneous arrest. They had prepared extensively for this moment and were ready to handle any complications or resistance. Emma Morrison and Marcus Chen were formally arrested on federal charges of money laundering, conspiracy, fraud, and racketeering. Their rights were read clearly and completely, and they were given opportunities to contact attorneys before being transported to federal detention facilities. The inheritance meeting that Emma had orchestrated to claim Dad's legacy had instead become the final scene of her criminal career. As federal agents led Emma away in handcuffs, she looked back at me with a mixture of hatred and betrayal that I will never forget. The sister who had once helped save my relationship with our father had become a stranger, whose greed and criminal behavior had destroyed any possibility of family reconciliation. Our relationship was ending not with forgiveness or understanding, but with federal charges and prison sentences. Marcus Chen's arrest was less dramatic but equally final. His law practice would be shut down immediately, his assets would be seized to pay restitution to victims of his money laundering operation, and his legal career would be permanently destroyed. The sophisticated financial schemes he had developed with Emma had seemed clever and profitable, but they had ultimately led to his complete professional and personal ruin. The conference room that had hosted our inheritance dispute was now empty, except for federal evidence collection teams and myself. Morrison Construction's legitimate operations would continue under court supervision, but the criminal enterprise that Emma and Marcus had built using our family business was finally being dismantled by federal investigators. Dad's legacy would survive Emma's betrayal, but our family would never be the same. The inheritance she had fought so desperately to claim was now beyond her reach forever, and the business she had used for criminal purposes would continue without her involvement. Her schemes had gained her temporary wealth, but had cost her everything that truly mattered. Walking out of Marcus Chen's law office that afternoon, I felt a strange mixture of relief, sadness, and liberation that I hadn't experienced since Dad's funeral 3 weeks earlier. The federal agents had done their work efficiently and professionally, and Emma's arrest had proceeded without incident, despite her obvious shock and disbelief. For the first time in months, I could think about Morrison Construction's future, without the constant stress of family conflict and hidden criminal activities. Agent Rodriguez debriefed me thoroughly about the meeting and Emma's reactions to learning about the federal investigation. She was particularly interested in Emma's complete lack of remorse or willingness to accept responsibility for her crimes. According to Agent Rodriguez, Emma's behavior was consistent with other white-collar criminals who convinced themselves that their theft and fraud were justified by their personal contributions or circumstances. The federal investigation was far from over, but Emma's arrest marked the beginning of the end for the money laundering network that had been operating throughout Denver's construction industry. Marcus Chen's law firm had been facilitating similar schemes for at least a dozen other local businesses, and Emma's cooperation would be essential for building cases against the remaining participants in the criminal enterprise. I spent the rest of that week working with federal agents and forensic accountants to separate Morrison Construction's legitimate business activities from the criminal operations that Emma and Marcus had been conducting. The process was complex and time-consuming, but it was necessary to preserve Dad's legacy and protect the innocent employees who had been unknowingly working for a company involved in money laundering. The most difficult part of the federal investigation was discovering how extensively Emma had compromised Morrison Construction's reputation within Denver's business community. Several of our long-term clients had been aware of Emma's felt oli pour Eprelun whites for expedited permits and flexible regulatory compliance. These business relationships would need to be terminated immediately to avoid further legal complications. Dad's employees were shocked and devastated to learn about Emma's criminal activities. Many of them had worked for Morrison Construction for decades and considered the company an extension of their own families. They felt betrayed by Emma's deception and worried about the future stability of their employment. I spent considerable time reassuring them that the legitimate aspects of the business would continue operating and that their jobs were secure. The local media coverage of Emma's arrest was extensive and damaging to Morrison Construction's public reputation. Denver's business community had respected our family for decades, and the revelation that our company had been used for money laundering sent shockwaves throughout the construction industry. Several competitors immediately began pursuing our clients with claims that Morrison Construction was no longer trustworthy or reliable. Rebuilding Morrison Construction's reputation became my primary focus during the weeks following Emma's arrest. I worked with a crisis management consultant to develop a comprehensive public relations strategy that emphasized our cooperation with federal investigators and our commitment to ethical business practices. The message was clear. Morrison Construction had been victimized by Emma's criminal behavior and was now operating under enhanced oversight to prevent future problems. The financial impact of Emma's crimes was substantial, but not devastating. The $400,000 she had stolen would need to be repaid to Morrison Construction, but her personal assets were being seized by federal agents to provide restitution. The loss of clients who had been involved in her illegal consulting services actually improved our business model by eliminating ethically questionable revenue streams. More challenging was the emotional impact of Emma's betrayal on our family's legacy and my personal memories of growing up in the Morrison household. Emma had been my closest sibling and my partner in continuing Dad's work, but her criminal behavior had revealed a side of her personality that I had never suspected existed. The sister I thought I knew had been largely an illusion created by years of sophisticated manipulation and deception. 3 months after Emma's arrest, I received an unexpected phone call that would change my perspective on everything that had happened. The caller was Lisa Parker, the owner of a small bookstore cafe called Chapter and Verse in downtown Denver. She had been following the media coverage of Morrison Construction's legal troubles and wanted to discuss a business proposal that seemed completely unrelated to federal investigations or construction industry politics. Lisa explained that she had been looking for a reliable contractor to help her expand her bookstore into the adjacent retail space, and that Morrison Construction's reputation for quality work and community involvement made us her preferred choice, despite our recent legal complications. She was particularly impressed by our cooperation with federal investigators and our commitment to rebuilding our business ethically. Our initial meeting at Chapter and Verse was supposed to focus on construction timelines and renovation costs, but Lisa and I ended up talking for hours about business ethics, family loyalty, and the challenges of maintaining personal integrity in competitive industries. Her perspective on Morrison Construction's situation was refreshing and optimistic, focusing on our potential for positive community impact rather than dwelling on Emma's criminal behavior. Lisa had her own experience with family betrayal and business complications. Her ex-husband had attempted to steal her bookstore through fraudulent legal maneuvers, forcing her to fight an expensive court battle to retain ownership of the business she had built from nothing. Her understanding of family loyalty and business betrayal gave her unique insight into my situation with Emma and Morrison Construction. Working on Lisa's bookstore expansion project became a turning point for Morrison Construction's recovery. The renovation was relatively small in scope, but Lisa's enthusiasm for our work and her positive recommendations to other local business owners helped rebuild our reputation within Denver's small business community. Her bookstore became a showcase for Morrison Construction's craftsmanship and attention to detail. More importantly, Lisa's friendship provided me with emotional support and perspective during the most difficult period of my life. She helped me understand that Emma's betrayal said more about her character than about our family's values, and that Dad's legacy could survive and even be strengthened by our response to the crisis she had created. Emma's criminal trial began 6 months after her arrest, and the federal prosecution's case was overwhelming and comprehensive. Agent Rodriguez and her team had documented every aspect of the money laundering operation, and Marcus Chen's cooperation provided detailed testimony about Emma's role in developing and managing the criminal enterprise. Emma's defense attorneys had no viable strategy for contesting the evidence against her. The trial revealed additional details about Emma's criminal activities that shocked me, despite my extensive cooperation with the federal investigation. She had been stealing from Morrison Construction for longer than anyone had realized, and her theft had begun almost immediately after Dad delegated financial oversight responsibilities to her. Her MBA education had provided her with sophisticated knowledge of accounting fraud techniques that she had used to hide her crimes for years. Emma's sentencing hearing was emotionally devastating for our entire family. She was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The judge emphasized that her abuse of family trust and her use of a legitimate business for criminal purposes warranted a significant prison sentence despite her lack of prior criminal history. I attended Emma's sentencing hearing despite having no obligation to be there, and she refused to make eye contact with me throughout the proceedings. Her complete lack of remorse or acknowledgement of responsibility was consistent with her behavior since her arrest. She seemed to view herself as a victim of circumstances, rather than as someone who had made deliberate choices to commit serious crimes. Marcus Chen received a longer sentence of 12 years in federal prison due to his leadership role in the money laundering network and his attempts to obstruct the federal investigation by destroying evidence. His law firm was permanently disbanded, and his assets were liquidated to provide restitution. The morning of Emma's final court hearing, I woke up in my apartment on Maple Ridge Drive, feeling like I was finally ready to move forward with my life. Morrison Construction had been operating under federal oversight for 8 months, and we had successfully completed 12 major projects without a single regulatory violation or ethical concern. Our reputation was slowly recovering, and several new clients had specifically chosen us because of our transparency and cooperation with law enforcement. Lisa had been instrumental in this recovery process, not just through her business referrals but through her unwavering support during the most challenging period of my professional and personal life. Her bookstore expansion had been completed 3 months earlier, and the project had exceeded all expectations for quality, efficiency, and community impact. Chapter and Verse had become a gathering place for Denver's literary community, and Lisa frequently hosted events that brought together authors, readers, and local business owners. What started as a professional relationship had gradually evolved into something much deeper and more meaningful. Lisa and I discovered that we shared similar values about family, business ethics, and community responsibility. Her experience with family betrayal had given her unique insight into my situation with Emma, and her perspective had helped me process the complex emotions surrounding my sister's criminal behavior and imprisonment. I had been planning to ask Lisa to dinner for weeks, but the ongoing federal investigation and court proceedings had made it difficult to focus on personal relationships. Emma's sentencing hearing represented the final chapter of a legal process that had dominated my life for nearly a year, and I was looking forward to finally having the emotional space to explore my feelings for Lisa without the constant stress of criminal investigations and media scrutiny. The courthouse was less crowded than I had expected when I arrived for Emma's hearing. Most of the media attention had shifted to other stories, and the federal prosecution had become routine rather than sensational. Agent Rodriguez greeted me in the hallway and briefed me on the expected proceedings, emphasizing that Emma's cooperation during the investigation had been minimal, and that her sentencing would reflect her continued refusal to accept responsibility for her crimes. Emma's appearance had changed dramatically during her months in federal detention. She looked older, thinner, and completely defeated in a way that was both satisfying and heartbreaking. The confident, manipulative woman who had tried to steal my inheritance had been replaced by someone who seemed fragile and lost. Her attorney looked equally demoralized, clearly recognizing that his client's case was hopeless. The federal prosecutor presented a comprehensive summary of Emma's crimes that lasted nearly 2 hours. The money laundering operation had been far more extensive than even I had realized, involving dozens of criminal enterprises throughout the Rocky Mountain region. Emma's role had been crucial to the network's success, and her theft from Morrison Construction had provided seed money for expanding their illegal activities into new markets and criminal enterprises. Marcus Chen's cooperation with federal investigators had provided detailed testimony about Emma's criminal activities, but his information had also revealed additional crimes that Emma had committed independently. She had been embezzling money from Morrison Construction for personal use, while simultaneously using the company as a front for money laundering operations. Her greed had been both personal and professional, motivated by lifestyle desires as well as criminal profit opportunities. The most damaging testimony came from several of Emma's co-conspirators who had been arrested in related cases. They described her as intelligent, ruthless, and completely without moral boundaries when it came to making money through illegal activities. Her MBA education had provided her with sophisticated knowledge of financial systems that she had used exclusively for criminal purposes rather than legitimate business development. Emma's defense attorney made a brief and unconvincing argument for leniency based on her lack of prior criminal history and her role as a victim of Marcus Chen's manipulation. His presentation was perfunctory and seemed designed more to fulfill his professional obligations than to seriously contest the federal charges. Emma herself declined the opportunity to make a statement before sentencing, maintaining her pattern of refusing to accept responsibility or express remorse. Judge Patricia Williams delivered Emma's sentence with obvious disappointment and frustration. She emphasized that Emma's abuse of family trust and her exploitation of a legitimate business for criminal purposes represented particularly serious forms of white-collar crime. The 8-year federal prison sentence, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, was intended to reflect both the severity of her crimes and the need to deter similar criminal behavior by other business professionals. Emma's reaction to her sentencing was minimal and emotionless. She showed no visible response to learning that she would spend the next 8 years in federal prison, and she made no attempt to communicate with me or other family members who were present in the courtroom. Her complete detachment from the proceedings was consistent with her behavior throughout the investigation and trial process. I left the courthouse feeling a strange combination of relief, sadness, and anticipation for the future. Emma's sentencing represented the end of a chapter in my life that had been dominated by betrayal, criminal investigations, and family conflict. Morrison Construction was now free to operate without federal oversight, and I was finally able to focus on rebuilding Dad's legacy and developing my relationship with Lisa. The drive from the courthouse to Chapter and Verse took me through downtown Denver neighborhoods, where Morrison Construction had built dozens of residential and commercial projects over the past 4 decades. Many of the buildings bore small plaques identifying Dad's company as the contractor, and seeing those reminders of his work reinforced my determination to continue his legacy of quality craftsmanship and community service. Lisa was waiting for me at her bookstore when I arrived, having closed early to provide privacy for our conversation about Emma's sentencing and my plans for the future. She had prepared coffee and sandwiches, and we spent the afternoon talking about everything that had happened over the past year, and discussing our hopes for what might come next in both our personal and professional lives. I told Lisa about my decision to completely restructure Morrison Construction's business model to focus exclusively on community development projects and small business construction. The experience with Emma's criminal activities had taught me that rapid growth and aggressive profit maximization could create opportunities for corruption and ethical compromise. Dad's original vision of steady, sustainable growth while maintaining strong community relationships was the path I wanted to follow. Lisa shared her own plans for expanding Chapter and Verse into a community resource center that would offer literacy programs, business development workshops, and cultural events for Denver's diverse neighborhoods. Her vision aligned perfectly with my goals for Morrison Construction, and we began discussing potential partnerships between our businesses that could benefit the entire community. The conversation naturally progressed to more personal topics as the afternoon continued. Lisa asked me directly about my feelings regarding Emma's imprisonment and whether I felt guilty about my role in her arrest and conviction. Her question was thoughtful and showed genuine concern for my emotional well-being, rather than mere curiosity about the legal proceedings. I explained to Lisa that my primary emotion regarding Emma's situation was profound sadness rather than satisfaction or guilt. Emma had possessed enormous potential for positive impact through her intelligence, education, and family resources. But she had chosen to use those advantages exclusively for criminal and selfish purposes. Her imprisonment was a natural consequence of her choices, rather than a punishment that had been imposed unfairly. More importantly, I told Lisa that Emma's criminal behavior had helped me understand the importance of surrounding myself with people who shared my values about honesty, integrity, and community responsibility. The experience had been painful and expensive, but it had also clarified my priorities and helped me appreciate relationships built on trust and mutual respect, rather than family obligation or business convenience. Lisa's response revealed that she had been thinking about our relationship in similar terms. She had been attracted to my handling of the crisis with Emma and Morrison Construction because it demonstrated character traits that were important to her in both business and personal relationships. My cooperation with federal investigators and my commitment to rebuilding Morrison Construction ethically had shown her that I was someone who could be trusted with both professional responsibilities and personal intimacy. As the evening progressed, Lisa and I acknowledged that our friendship had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than either of us had initially expected. The shared experience of supporting each other through difficult family and business challenges had created a foundation of trust and understanding that seemed like a solid basis for exploring a romantic relationship. Lisa's bookstore had become a comfortable and familiar space for me during the months of federal investigation and court proceedings. I had spent countless evenings there reading, working on Morrison Construction business plans, and talking with Lisa about everything from literature to construction techniques to family dynamics. The space felt like a sanctuary where I could escape from the stress and complications of my legal and business problems. That evening, Lisa asked me if I wanted to stay for dinner and continue our conversation about the future. Her invitation was casual and friendly, but I could sense that she was offering something more significant than just a meal and companionship. The timing felt right for taking our relationship to the next level, now that the legal complications with Emma were finally resolved. We spent the evening cooking together in the small kitchen behind Lisa's bookstore, sharing stories about our childhoods, our career aspirations, and our hopes for the future. The conversation was easy and natural, flowing from serious topics to light-hearted banter, without any awkward pauses or uncomfortable moments. I realized that Lisa had become not just a romantic interest, but also my closest friend and most trusted confidant. Lisa shared more details about her experience with her ex-husband's attempts to steal her bookstore, and I could see parallels between her situation and my problems with Emma. Both of us had been betrayed by people we trusted, and both of us had been forced to fight expensive legal battles to protect businesses that represented our life's work and our family legacies. The shared experience had created a bond between us that went beyond normal relationship development. As we cleaned up after dinner, Lisa mentioned that she had been planning to ask me about my intentions regarding our relationship. She had noticed that I seemed more relaxed and optimistic since Emma's sentencing, and she wanted to know if I was ready to move forward with exploring a romantic partnership. Her directness was refreshing and demonstrated the kind of honest communication that had been missing from my relationship with Emma. I told Lisa that I had been planning to ask her to dinner for weeks, but that the ongoing legal proceedings had made it difficult to focus on personal relationships. Emma's sentencing represented the end of a chapter in my life that had been dominated by family conflict and criminal investigations, and I was finally ready to invest emotional energy in building something positive and meaningful with someone who shared my values and aspirations. Lisa's response was enthusiastic and encouraging. She had been hoping that our friendship would develop into something more substantial, but she had been hesitant to pursue a romantic relationship while I was dealing with such significant family and legal stress. The resolution of Emma's case created an opportunity for us to explore our feelings without the complications of ongoing criminal investigations and media scrutiny. We spent the rest of the evening planning our first official date, discussing restaurants we wanted to try together and activities we might enjoy as a couple. The conversation was filled with excitement and anticipation for the future, representing a dramatic contrast to the stress and uncertainty that had dominated my life for the past year. Lisa had become a source of hope and optimism during the darkest period of my life, and I was eager to show her how much her support had meant to me. That night, as I drove home to my apartment on Maple Ridge Drive, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed over the past year. Emma's betrayal had been devastating and expensive, but it had also led me to meet Lisa and had forced me to clarify my values and priorities in ways that might not have happened otherwise. Dad's legacy would survive Emma's criminal behavior, and Morrison Construction would continue serving the Denver community under principles of honesty and integrity that Emma had abandoned. The inheritance dispute that had brought Emma and me to Marcus Chen's law office had been resolved in ways that none of us could have anticipated. Emma had lost everything she had fought so desperately to claim, while I had gained something far more valuable than money or property. Lisa represented the possibility of building a life based on trust, mutual respect, and shared values, rather than family obligation or financial convenience. Morrison Construction's future looked brighter than it had in years. We had emerged from the federal investigation with enhanced credibility and a reputation for ethical business practices that was attracting new clients who valued integrity over low prices. The company was smaller than it had been under Emma's management, but it was also more sustainable and more aligned with Dad's original vision of community service and quality craftsmanship. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about Dad and wondered what he would think about everything that had happened with Emma and Morrison Construction. I believed he would be disappointed by Emma's criminal behavior but proud of my decision to cooperate with federal investigators and rebuild the company according to ethical principles. Dad had always emphasized that reputation was more valuable than profit, and his lessons had guided my decisions throughout the crisis that Emma had created. The next morning would mark the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one focused on building positive relationships and contributing to my community, rather than dealing with family betrayal and criminal investigations. Emma's choices had led her to federal prison, but my choices were leading me toward a future filled with hope, love, and meaningful work that would honor Dad's memory while creating something new and valuable for the next generation. Chapter 4. 2 weeks after Emma's sentencing, I received a phone call that initially seemed like a routine business inquiry but quickly developed into something much more complex and concerning. The caller identified himself as Detective Ray Sullivan from the Denver Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit, and he wanted to discuss Morrison Construction's involvement in what he described as ongoing investigative matters related to Emma's criminal network. Detective Sullivan explained that Emma's cooperation with federal investigators had been more extensive than I had realized, and that her information had led to arrests and indictments involving several other construction companies throughout the Denver metropolitan area. Morrison Construction was not a target of any new investigations, but our company's records and my testimony might be needed to support prosecutions of other defendants who had been involved in the money laundering network. The detective's call reminded me that Emma's criminal activities had created ripple effects that would continue affecting Morrison Construction and my personal life for months or possibly years to come. While the federal charges against Emma had been resolved, the broader criminal network she had been part of was still being dismantled by law enforcement agencies at multiple levels. My cooperation with these ongoing investigations would be voluntary, but strongly encouraged. I agreed to meet with Detective Sullivan the following week to discuss Morrison Construction's potential role in future prosecutions. The meeting would take place at the police station rather than at my office, since the detective wanted to maintain confidentiality about the ongoing investigations and avoid drawing attention to Morrison Construction's continued involvement in law enforcement activities. Lisa was supportive of my decision to continue cooperating with law enforcement despite the potential complications for our developing relationship and Morrison Construction's business operations. She understood that my credibility and the company's reputation depended on maintaining complete transparency with investigative authorities, even when such cooperation was inconvenient or potentially damaging to our personal and professional interests. The meeting with Detective Sullivan revealed that Emma's criminal network had been far more sophisticated and extensive than even the federal investigators had initially realized. Marcus Chen's law firm had been facilitating money laundering operations for over 50 construction companies throughout Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico. The network had processed millions of dollars in illegal funds over a 5-year period, and Emma's role had been crucial to the operation's success in the Denver market. Detective Sullivan was particularly interested in Morrison Construction's relationships with specific vendors and subcontractors who had been identified as participants in the money laundering network. Emma had used our company's reputation and established business relationships to introduce criminal enterprises to legitimate businesses that could be corrupted or manipulated into providing money laundering services. Several of Dad's longtime business partners had been approached by Emma with investment opportunities that were actually fronts for criminal enterprises. Most of these business owners had declined Emma's proposals, but a few had been drawn into the network through a combination of financial incentives and professional relationships. Detective Sullivan needed my help identifying which of Morrison Construction's business relationships might have been compromised by Emma's criminal activities. The investigation revealed that Emma had been more systematic and calculating in her criminal behavior than I had previously understood. She had spent months studying Morrison Construction's operations, client relationships, and financial systems before beginning her theft and money laundering activities. Her MBA education had provided her with sophisticated knowledge of business operations that she had used exclusively for criminal rather than legitimate purposes. Emma had also been more paranoid and security conscious than the federal investigators had initially realized. She had maintained detailed records of her criminal activities, but she had encrypted and hidden these records in ways that made them difficult for law enforcement agencies to access and interpret. Her cooperation with federal investigators had been motivated primarily by self-interest, rather than genuine remorse or desire to help prosecute her co-conspirators. Detective Sullivan explained that Emma's sentencing had been structured to encourage her continued cooperation with ongoing investigations. Her 8-year federal prison sentence could potentially be reduced through a formal cooperation agreement if her information led to successful prosecutions of other defendants in the money laundering network. This arrangement gave Emma strong incentives to provide complete and accurate information about her criminal activities and co-conspirators. However, the detective also warned me that Emma's cooperation had revealed additional crimes that she had committed independently of the money laundering network. She had been embezzling money from Morrison Construction for personal use while simultaneously using the company as a front for criminal enterprises. Her theft had been both opportunistic and systematic, motivated by greed as well as the practical need to fund her lifestyle and criminal activities. The most disturbing revelation was that Emma had been planning to expand her criminal activities significantly before her arrest. She had been developing relationships with criminal enterprises in other states and had been exploring opportunities to franchise her money laundering techniques to construction companies in different regional markets. Her arrest had prevented a major expansion of criminal activities that could have involved dozens of additional businesses and hundreds of additional victims. Detective Sullivan also informed me that Emma had been under surveillance by multiple law enforcement agencies for longer than anyone had previously disclosed. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had been monitoring her activities for over a year before approaching me for cooperation, and local police departments had been investigating several of her business associates for various criminal activities. Emma's arrest had been part of a coordinated law enforcement operation that was much larger and more complex than I had realized. This information helped explain why federal agents had been so well prepared when they executed arrest warrants for Emma and Marcus Chen. They had been planning the operation for months and had coordinated with multiple law enforcement agencies to ensure that all participants in the criminal network could be arrested simultaneously. Emma's confidence in her ability to avoid detection had been completely unfounded. Detective Sullivan asked me to review Morrison Construction's financial records for the past 5 years to identify any transactions or business relationships that might be connected to the ongoing investigations. This review would be time-consuming and potentially expensive, but it was necessary to ensure that Morrison Construction had no remaining connections to criminal enterprises and to provide evidence for prosecuting other defendants in the money laundering network. I agreed to provide full cooperation with Detective Sullivan's investigation, despite the potential complications for Morrison Construction's operations and my personal life. Lisa and I had discussed the possibility that my involvement with law enforcement investigations might continue for an extended period, and we had agreed that maintaining complete transparency with investigative authorities was essential for protecting Morrison Construction's reputation and my personal credibility. The financial review process took several weeks and required assistance from forensic accountants who specialized in analyzing complex money laundering operations. The accountants identified several transactions and business relationships that had been influenced by Emma's criminal activities, but they also confirmed that Morrison Construction's current operations were completely clean and free from any criminal connections. The review process also revealed the full extent of Emma's theft from Morrison Construction. She had stolen over $600,000 during the 4 years before her arrest, significantly more than the $400,000 that had been initially identified by federal investigators. The additional theft had been accomplished through more sophisticated techniques that had taken longer for forensic accountants to trace and document. Emma's theft had been carefully planned and executed over an extended period. She had gradually increased the amounts she was stealing as she gained confidence in her ability to avoid detection, and she had used increasingly sophisticated techniques to hide her activities from Dad and me. Her MBA education had provided her with detailed knowledge of accounting fraud techniques that she had implemented systematically and professionally. The financial review also revealed that Emma had been preparing to steal much larger amounts of money before her arrest. She had been developing new techniques for diverting funds from Morrison Construction's accounts, and she had been exploring opportunities to steal money from the company's clients and vendors, as well as from internal operations. Her arrest had prevented significantly more extensive financial crimes. Detective Sullivan used the financial review results to build stronger cases against several other defendants in the money laundering network. Emma's theft techniques had been taught to other participants in the criminal enterprise, and her methods had been used to steal money from dozens of other businesses throughout the Rocky Mountain region. Her cooperation was essential for prosecuting the leaders of the criminal network. The ongoing investigations also revealed that Marcus Chen's law firm had been more central to the money laundering network than anyone had initially realized. Chen had been providing legal services to criminal enterprises for over a decade, and his client list included drug trafficking organizations, illegal gambling operations, and various other criminal enterprises throughout multiple states. Emma's case was just one small part of a much larger criminal enterprise. Chen's cooperation with federal investigators had been motivated primarily by his desire to minimize his own prison sentence, rather than by genuine remorse or commitment to justice. His information had been valuable for prosecuting other defendants, but his credibility as a witness was limited by his obvious self-interest and his attempts to minimize his own culpability for the criminal network's activities. The most surprising revelation was that Emma had been planning to eliminate me as a potential threat to her criminal activities. Detective Sullivan showed me surveillance reports indicating that Emma had been researching methods for discrediting me professionally or potentially arranging for my disappearance. Her plans had been preliminary and had not progressed to the point of active implementation, but they demonstrated the extent of her paranoia and desperation. Emma's willingness to consider harming me physically represented a level of criminal thinking that went far beyond simple theft or money laundering. She had been prepared to commit violent crimes to protect her financial schemes, and her arrest had potentially prevented much more serious criminal activities. The sister I had grown up with had become someone I didn't recognize and couldn't trust under any circumstances. Detective Sullivan's investigation also revealed that Emma had been maintaining romantic relationships with several participants in the criminal network. These relationships had been motivated by business considerations rather than genuine emotional attachments, and Emma had been using her personal relationships to gather information and maintain influence within the criminal enterprise. Her manipulation had extended to every aspect of her personal and professional life. The investigation confirmed that Emma's arrest and conviction had been appropriate and necessary. She had been a willing and active participant in criminal activities that had harmed dozens of businesses and hundreds of individuals throughout the Rocky Mountain region. Her cooperation with law enforcement had been valuable, but had been motivated by self-interest, rather than genuine remorse or desire to repair the damage she had caused. As Detective Sullivan's investigation concluded, I reflected on how completely Emma had betrayed everything our family had stood for during Dad's lifetime. Her criminal activities had not only stolen money from Morrison Construction, but had also compromised the reputation and integrity that Dad had spent 40 years building. Her actions had been a deliberate rejection of the values and principles that had guided our family's approach to business and community relationships. The ongoing investigations would continue for several more months, but my role would be limited to providing occasional testimony and documentation as needed. Morrison Construction was finally free to focus on rebuilding and growing according to the ethical principles that Dad had established and that I was committed to maintaining. Emma's criminal behavior would have lasting consequences for her personally, but it would not be allowed to destroy the legacy that Dad had created through decades of honest work and community service. Chapter 5. 6 months after Emma's sentencing, I received a letter from her at the Federal Correctional Facility, where she was serving her 8-year sentence. The letter was unexpected and unwelcome, representing the first communication I had received from Emma since her arrest. I debated whether to read it, or simply dispose of it without opening the envelope, but curiosity ultimately overcame my desire to maintain complete separation from my imprisoned sister. Emma's letter was 3 pages long and written in the careful, controlled handwriting that I remembered from her childhood. The tone was manipulative and self-serving, consistent with her behavior throughout the investigation and trial process. She claimed to have undergone a spiritual transformation during her months in prison and expressed regret for the misunderstandings that had led to her incarceration and our family's separation. The letter carefully avoided accepting full responsibility for her criminal activities while simultaneously requesting my forgiveness and financial assistance. Emma claimed that her imprisonment was partially the result of Marcus Chen's manipulation, and that she had been an unwilling participant in many of the crimes for which she had been convicted. Her version of events was inconsistent with the extensive evidence that federal investigators had compiled, and with her own admissions during plea negotiations. Emma's most audacious request was for me to visit her in prison so that we could rebuild our family relationship and discuss her plans for after her release. She suggested that her incarceration had given her time to reflect on her mistakes and develop a more mature perspective on family loyalty and business ethics. Her letter implied that she expected to resume some role in Morrison Construction's operations after completing her prison sentence. I showed Emma's letter to Lisa, who had become my closest advisor on family and business matters during the months since Emma's sentencing. Lisa's reaction was immediate and unambiguous. She believed that Emma's letter was another attempt at manipulation and that any response would only encourage further contact. Lisa advised me to ignore the letter completely and to inform Emma's prison officials if she continued attempting to communicate with me. Detective Sullivan had warned me that Emma might attempt to contact me from prison as part of her ongoing cooperation with federal investigations. Imprisoned defendants sometimes used family communications to gather information about ongoing prosecutions, or to coordinate their testimony with other defendants. Sullivan had advised me to report any contact from Emma to law enforcement authorities, and to avoid providing her with any information about Morrison Construction's current operations. I decided to follow Lisa's advice and Detective Sullivan's instructions by ignoring Emma's letter completely. Responding to her communication would serve no legitimate purpose and might encourage her to believe that our relationship could be restored despite her criminal behavior and betrayal of our family's trust. Emma had made her choices and would need to face the consequences without expecting forgiveness or assistance from me. The letter did prompt me to reflect on how dramatically my life had changed during the year since Emma's arrest. Morrison Construction had not only recovered from the crisis she had created, but had actually become more successful and profitable than it had been under her management. Our focus on ethical business practices and community service had attracted new clients who valued integrity over low prices, and our reputation within Denver's business community was stronger than it had been in years. Lisa and I had been dating for 4 months, and our relationship had developed into something serious and meaningful for both of us. We had discovered shared values about family, business, and community responsibility that created a solid foundation for long-term partnership. Lisa's bookstore had become a gathering place for Denver's literary and business communities, and several Morrison Construction clients had discovered our services through connections they made at chapter and verse. More importantly, Lisa had helped me process the complex emotions surrounding Emma's betrayal and imprisonment. Her own experience with family conflict and business challenges had given her unique insight into my situation, and her perspective had helped me move forward with my life rather than remaining trapped by anger and disappointment about Emma's choices. Morrison Construction's business model had evolved significantly during the months since Emma's arrest. I had deliberately chosen to focus on smaller, community-oriented projects rather than pursuing the aggressive growth strategies that Emma had favored. Our current approach was more sustainable financially and more aligned with Dad's original vision of serving the Denver community through quality craftsmanship and reliable service. The federal oversight of Morrison Construction's operations had ended 6 months after Emma's arrest, but I had chosen to maintain many of the transparency and accountability measures that had been implemented during the investigation. These practices had enhanced our credibility with clients and vendors, and they provided additional protection against potential financial irregularities or ethical compromises. Our employee base had stabilized after the initial shock of Emma's arrest and the revelations about her criminal activities. Several longtime employees had initially considered leaving Morrison Construction due to concerns about the company's future stability, but they had remained with us after seeing our commitment to ethical operations and community service. Their loyalty and expertise were essential resources for continuing Dad's legacy. I had also made significant changes to Morrison Construction's financial management systems to prevent the kind of theft and fraud that Emma had been able to commit for several years. All financial transactions now required multiple approvals, and we had implemented independent auditing procedures that would detect unusual patterns or unauthorized activities. These changes were expensive but necessary for protecting the company's assets and reputation. The most challenging aspect of rebuilding Morrison Construction had been repairing relationships with clients and vendors who had been affected by Emma's criminal activities. Several longtime business partners had been approached by Emma with illegal proposals, and their trust in our company had been damaged by her behavior. Rebuilding these relationships required patience, transparency, and consistent demonstration of our commitment to ethical business practices. One unexpected benefit of the crisis Emma had created was that it had forced me to develop closer relationships with Morrison Construction's employees and clients. During the federal investigation and rebuilding process, I had spent much more time in direct contact with the people who actually performed our construction work and the customers who relied on our services. These relationships had given me a better understanding of Dad's approach to business and a deeper appreciation for the community connections that had made Morrison Construction successful. Lisa had been instrumental in helping me navigate the social and professional challenges of rebuilding Morrison Construction's reputation. Her connections within Denver's small business community had provided opportunities for Morrison Construction to demonstrate our capabilities and integrity through high-profile projects that received positive media attention. Her support had been both practical and emotional, helping me maintain confidence during difficult periods. As Emma's first year in prison concluded, I realized that I had no desire to maintain any relationship with her after her eventual release. Her letter had demonstrated that imprisonment had not changed her fundamental character or her tendency to manipulate situations for personal advantage. Emma would complete her sentence and return to society, but she would do so without any support or assistance from me. Morrison Construction's future was brighter than it had been at any time since Dad's death. We had weathered the crisis that Emma's criminal behavior had created, and we had emerged stronger and more focused on our core mission of serving the Denver community through quality construction services. The company was smaller than it had been under Emma's management, but it was also more sustainable and more aligned with the values that Dad had established. Lisa and I had begun discussing the possibility of marriage and the potential for combining our businesses in ways that would benefit both Chapter and Verse and Morrison Construction. Our shared commitment to community service and ethical business practices suggested that we could build something together that would be greater than the sum of our individual efforts. The inheritance dispute that had brought Emma and me to Marcus Chen's law office had been resolved in ways that neither of us could have anticipated. Emma had lost everything she had fought to claim and had gained a federal prison sentence that would define the next 8 years of her life. I had inherited not just Dad's business and property, but also the responsibility for preserving his legacy and continuing his commitment to the Denver community. Emma's choices had led her to federal prison and permanent separation from our family. My choices had led me to Lisa, to a rebuilt and stronger Morrison Construction, and to a future filled with possibilities for positive impact within the community that Dad had served for 4 decades. The paper I had shown Emma in Marcus Chen's office had indeed brought response teams storming in, but the ultimate result had been justice rather than reconciliation. As I prepared for bed that evening, I disposed of Emma's letter without responding to it. Her attempt to reestablish contact had served only to remind me how completely she had betrayed our family's trust, and how thoroughly she had rejected the values that Dad had worked to instill in both of us. Emma would serve her time and eventually be released, but she would do so as a stranger rather than as a sister. 3 years had passed since Emma's imprisonment when I received the most shocking revelation of the entire ordeal. I was sitting in my office at Morrison Construction, reviewing quarterly financial reports that showed our most successful year since Dad's passing, when Agent Rodriguez called with news that would forever change my understanding of everything that had happened with Emma and our family business. Agent Rodriguez explained that Emma had been providing information to federal investigators about criminal activities that went far beyond the money laundering network she had participated in. During her cooperation interviews, Emma had revealed that she possessed evidence of a massive construction industry conspiracy involving bid rigging, bribery, and fraud that had been operating throughout Colorado for over a decade. The scope of this conspiracy was so extensive that it had affected billions of dollars in public and private construction projects. What made this revelation particularly devastating was that Dad had unknowingly been a victim of this conspiracy for years. Emma's evidence showed that Morrison Construction had lost dozens of major contracts due to illegal bid rigging schemes orchestrated by our competitors. Projects that Dad had spent months preparing proposals for had been awarded to companies that had paid bribes or participated in price-fixing arrangements. Dad's honest approach to bidding had put Morrison Construction at a systematic disadvantage that he never understood or recognized. Emma's knowledge of this conspiracy had come from her involvement with Marcus Chen's criminal network, which had been connected to the corrupt contractors and government officials who were orchestrating the bid rigging schemes. Her participation in money laundering activities had given her access to information about the broader corruption that was affecting Colorado's entire construction industry. She had been aware of the conspiracy throughout the period when she was stealing from Morrison Construction, but she had never informed Dad or me about the illegal activities that were costing our company millions of dollars in lost revenue. Agent Rodriguez requested that I meet with federal prosecutors to discuss Morrison Construction's potential role as a victim in the broader corruption investigation. The meeting would involve reviewing decades of our bidding records and contract awards to identify specific instances where Morrison Construction had been harmed by illegal activities. This process would be time-consuming and potentially emotionally difficult, since it would involve revisiting many of Dad's most disappointing business losses, with the knowledge that those losses had been caused by criminal conspiracies rather than legitimate competition. The revelation that Dad had been systematically cheated by corrupt competitors was both vindicating and heartbreaking. Throughout his career, Dad had occasionally expressed frustration about losing contracts to companies that he believed were inferior in terms of quality, reliability, and pricing. He had sometimes wondered whether there were factors beyond his control that were affecting Morrison Construction's success in competitive bidding situations. Now I understood that Dad's instincts had been correct, and that his honest approach to business had been undermined by criminal conspiracies that he could never have anticipated or defended against. Lisa was supportive of my decision to cooperate with the broader corruption investigation, despite the potential complications for our personal and professional lives. She understood that seeking justice for Dad's losses was important for honoring his memory and ensuring that Morrison Construction received appropriate compensation for the damage that had been caused by criminal activities. Her encouragement was essential during this period, since the investigation would require significant time and emotional energy that could otherwise be devoted to our relationship and our businesses. The federal prosecutors assigned to the corruption case were different from the agents who had handled Emma's money laundering prosecution, but they were equally professional and thorough in their approach to investigating complex financial crimes. They explained that the corruption investigation had been ongoing for several years, and had already resulted in arrests and indictments involving dozens of contractors, government officials, and other participants in the conspiracy. Morrison Construction's records would be crucial evidence for demonstrating the scope and impact of the bid-rigging schemes. Dad had maintained meticulous documentation of every project Morrison Construction had bid on during his 40-year career, including detailed cost analyses, timeline projections, and correspondence with potential clients. This documentation would allow federal investigators to identify specific instances where Morrison Construction had been disadvantaged by illegal activities, and to calculate the financial damage that had been caused by the conspiracy. The process of reviewing Morrison Construction's historical records was emotionally challenging because it required reliving many of Dad's most significant disappointments with the knowledge that those disappointments had been caused by criminal activities rather than legitimate business competition. Dad had taken pride in his honest approach to bidding and had sometimes questioned whether his methods were too conservative or outdated compared to his competitors. Learning that his competitors had been cheating rather than simply being more aggressive or innovative was both validating and frustrating. Several of Morrison Construction's longtime employees participated in the federal investigation by providing testimony about suspicious activities they had observed over the years. Many of them had noticed patterns in contract awards that seemed inconsistent with competitive bidding principles, but they had assumed that these patterns reflected legitimate business strategies rather than criminal conspiracies. Their observations provided additional evidence for federal prosecutors and helped document the systematic nature of the corruption that had affected Colorado's construction industry. The investigation revealed that the bid-rigging conspiracy had been far more sophisticated and extensive than anyone had initially realized. The participants had used complex communication systems, coded language, and elaborate financial arrangements to coordinate their illegal activities while avoiding detection by law enforcement agencies. The conspiracy had involved not just contractors but also government officials, architects, engineers, and other professionals who were supposed to ensure fair and competitive bidding processes. Emma's cooperation with federal investigators had been motivated primarily by her desire to reduce her own prison sentence, but her information had been invaluable for exposing the broader corruption that had affected the entire construction industry. Her involvement in Marcus Chen's money laundering network had given her access to information that would have been difficult for federal investigators to obtain through other means. Despite her criminal behavior, Emma's cooperation was helping to bring justice to dozens of other victims who had been harmed by the conspiracy. The most shocking revelation was that the bid-rigging conspiracy had been operating for over 15 years, meaning that Morrison Construction had been disadvantaged by illegal activities throughout most of Dad's career. The conspiracy had cost Morrison Construction an estimated $2 million in lost profits during the period for which documentation was available. This amount represented dozens of major projects that Dad had lost due to criminal activities rather than legitimate competitive factors. Federal prosecutors explained that Morrison Construction would be eligible for substantial financial compensation as a victim of the conspiracy, but that the restitution process would take several years to complete. The participants in the conspiracy would be required to pay damages to their victims, but the amounts would depend on the success of criminal prosecutions and the financial resources of the defendants. Some compensation was virtually guaranteed, but the full amount might not be recovered for many years. The corruption investigation also revealed connections between the bid-rigging conspiracy and other criminal activities that had affected Colorado's construction industry. Several participants in the conspiracy had also been involved in tax evasion schemes, environmental regulation violations, and workplace safety violations that had endangered construction workers and the general public. The scope of criminal activity within the industry was far broader than anyone had previously understood. During this period, Morrison Construction continued operating successfully under the ethical principles that Dad had established, and that I had recommitted to following Emma's arrest. Our reputation for honesty and quality work had actually improved as a result of the corruption investigation, since many clients preferred working with contractors who were not involved in criminal activities. The investigation had created opportunities for Morrison Construction to compete for projects on a more level playing field than had existed during Dad's career. Lisa's bookstore had become a gathering place for Denver's business community during the corruption investigation, as local business owners sought information and support while dealing with the revelations about widespread criminal activity within the construction industry. Chapter and Verse hosted several community meetings where business leaders discussed strategies for rebuilding trust and ensuring ethical practices in future construction projects. Lisa's leadership during this period enhanced her reputation within Denver's business community and strengthened her relationship with Morrison Construction's clients and partners. The federal investigation also led to significant reforms in Colorado's construction industry regulations and oversight procedures. Government agencies implemented new bidding procedures designed to prevent future corruption, and professional organizations established enhanced ethical standards for contractors, architects, and engineers. These reforms would benefit Morrison Construction and other honest contractors by creating a more competitive and transparent business environment. As the corruption investigation progressed, I developed a deeper appreciation for Dad's integrity and his commitment to honest business practices. Throughout his career, Dad had resisted pressure to participate in questionable activities that might have improved Morrison Construction's short-term profitability. His principled approach had sometimes resulted in lost opportunities and financial disappointments, but it had also protected Morrison Construction from the criminal liability that was now destroying other construction companies. Emma's role in exposing the corruption conspiracy was complicated and morally ambiguous. Her cooperation was helping to bring justice to victims of criminal activities, but her motivation was primarily self-serving rather than altruistic. She had participated in criminal activities herself and had failed to warn Dad and me about the conspiracy that was harming Morrison Construction. Her cooperation was valuable but did not excuse or diminish her own criminal behavior. The investigation revealed that several of Morrison Construction's former competitors would be facing significant criminal charges and financial penalties as a result of their participation in the conspiracy. Companies that had built their success on illegal activities were now facing bankruptcy, criminal prosecution, and permanent exclusion from government contracting opportunities. The competitive landscape of Colorado's construction industry would be permanently changed by the investigation and prosecutions. Detective Sullivan, who had continued investigating related criminal activities, informed me that Emma's cooperation had also led to arrests in other states where similar corruption conspiracies had been operating. Her information had helped federal investigators identify patterns of criminal activity that extended far beyond Colorado's construction industry. The scope of corruption that Emma's cooperation had helped expose was national in scale and involved hundreds of companies and government officials. The emotional impact of learning about the systematic cheating that had affected Dad's career was significant and lasting. I felt anger about the criminal activities that had harmed Morrison Construction, sadness about Dad's disappointments that had been caused by illegal activities, and satisfaction about the justice that was finally being served to the participants in the conspiracy. Processing these complex emotions required ongoing conversations with Lisa and occasional counseling to ensure that I could maintain focus on Morrison Construction's future, rather than becoming consumed by anger about past injustices. Lisa helped me understand that Dad would have been proud of Morrison Construction's role in exposing and prosecuting the corruption that had harmed so many honest contractors and construction workers. Our cooperation with federal investigators was consistent with Dad's values and was helping to create a more ethical and competitive business environment for future generations of construction professionals. Dad's legacy was being honored not just through Morrison Construction's continued success, but also through our contribution to justice and industry reform. The corruption investigation provided additional validation for the business model that Dad had established, and that I had continued following Emma's arrest. Our focus on quality work, honest pricing, and community service had always been the right approach, even when it seemed to put Morrison Construction at a competitive disadvantage. The investigation revealed that our competitors' apparent advantages had been based on criminal activities rather than superior business strategies or capabilities. As the federal investigation moved toward criminal trials and restitution proceedings, I reflected on how dramatically the discovery of the corruption conspiracy had changed my understanding of Dad's career and Morrison Construction's history. Dad had been competing against criminal enterprises, rather than legitimate businesses for much of his career, and his honest approach had been more successful than anyone had realized given the illegal obstacles he had been facing. Morrison Construction's future was brighter than ever, as a result of the corruption investigation and the industry reforms that were being implemented. We were now competing in a more honest and transparent business environment, and our reputation for integrity was attracting clients who valued ethical business practices. The financial compensation we would eventually receive from the conspiracy participants would provide resources for expanding Morrison Construction's capabilities and continuing Dad's legacy of community service. The investigation also strengthened my relationship with Lisa by demonstrating our shared commitment to justice and ethical business practices. Her support during the investigation had been unwavering, and her involvement in the community meetings at Chapter and Verse had shown her leadership capabilities and her commitment to improving Denver's business environment. Our partnership was based on shared values that had been tested and proven during challenging circumstances. Emma's cooperation with the corruption investigation would likely result in additional reductions to her prison sentence, but it would not change the fundamental nature of our relationship or her future role in Morrison Construction. She had chosen to participate in criminal activities rather than protect our family's business from corruption, and her cooperation was motivated by self-interest rather than genuine remorse or family loyalty. Emma would benefit from her cooperation, but she would do so as a stranger rather than as a sister. 5 years after Emma's imprisonment, on a crisp October morning that reminded me of the day Dad first taught me to read construction blueprints, I received a phone call that would completely shatter everything I thought I knew about my family. The caller was Dr. Patricia Hartwell, a forensic accountant who had been working with federal investigators on the corruption case. Her voice carried an urgency that immediately put me on alert. Dr. Hartwell explained that during their final review of evidence seized from Marcus Chen's law firm, investigators had discovered a safety deposit box that contained documents Emma had hidden from everyone, including her own criminal associates. The contents of this box revealed that Emma's criminal activities had begun much earlier than anyone realized and had involved systematic manipulation of Dad's medical care during his final illness. The documents proved that Emma had been deliberately hastening Dad's death while positioning herself to inherit Morrison Construction before her own crimes could be discovered. The safety deposit box contained detailed records of Emma's interactions with Dad's medical team, including payments to a corrupt physician who had been prescribing medications that would worsen Dad's cardiovascular condition rather than treating it. Emma had been slowly poisoning our father while presenting herself as his devoted caregiver, calculating that his death would give her complete control over Morrison Construction before federal investigators could uncover her money laundering activities. Dr. Hartwell's revelation hit me like a physical blow. Everything I had believed about Dad's final months was a lie. Emma hadn't been the loving daughter caring for her sick father. She had been his murderer, systematically weakening his health while stealing from his business and preparing to claim his entire legacy. The grief I had processed over Dad's natural death was being replaced by rage over his murder at the hands of the daughter he had trusted most. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Emma's records included detailed schedules of medication administration, payments to Dr. Kevin Morrison, no relation despite the shared surname, who had been slowly increasing Dad's cardiac medications to dangerous levels, while reporting improved health to the rest of the medical team. Emma had researched methods for causing heart failure that would appear natural, and she had implemented these methods systematically over the final 6 months of Dad's life. The most chilling discovery was Emma's detailed timeline showing how she had planned Dad's death to coincide with the completion of several major Morrison Construction projects that would maximize the company's value at the time of inheritance. She had been calculating the optimal moment for Dad's murder based on business considerations rather than any natural progression of his illness. Dad's death had been scheduled and executed according to Emma's financial planning rather than medical necessity. Dr. Trot Hartwell explained that Emma's murder of Dad would result in additional federal charges that could extend her prison sentence significantly. First-degree murder in connection with financial crimes carried potential life imprisonment, and the evidence against Emma was comprehensive enough to support a successful prosecution. Her cooperation in other criminal cases would not protect her from facing the full consequences of murdering our father. I was too shocked to respond coherently to Dr. Hartwell's revelation. The sister who had saved my relationship with Dad years earlier had actually murdered him for money while I was visiting his bedside and believing he was receiving excellent medical care. Emma's performance as the devoted daughter had been covering up the most heinous crime imaginable, and I had been completely deceived by her manipulation throughout Dad's final months. Lisa found me sitting in my office several hours later, staring at the wall where Dad's favorite construction photo hung. I had been unable to work or think clearly since Dr. Hartwell's call, and I was struggling to process the reality that Dad had been murdered by the person he loved and trusted most. Lisa's presence was comforting, but even her support couldn't diminish the horror of learning that Emma's betrayal had extended to taking Dad's life. I told Lisa everything Dr. Hartwell had revealed, and her reaction was immediate revulsion and anger toward Emma. Lisa had never met Dad, but she had heard countless stories about his integrity and kindness during our relationship. The idea that Emma had murdered such a good man for financial gain was incomprehensible to both of us, and it made Emma's previous crimes seem minor by comparison. Lisa helped me understand that Emma's willingness to murder Dad explained many aspects of her behavior that had previously seemed merely greedy or selfish. Someone capable of killing their own father for money would obviously have no moral boundaries regarding theft, fraud, or betraying family relationships. Emma's criminal activities had been symptoms of a fundamentally evil character, rather than temporary lapses in judgment or ethical confusion. The federal prosecutors handling Emma's case contacted me within hours of Dr. Hartwell's call to discuss the additional charges that would be filed against Emma. They explained that the murder charges would be prosecuted separately from her financial crimes and would likely result in a life sentence without possibility of parole. Emma's cooperation in other cases would not influence the prosecution of Dad's murder, since there could be no plea bargaining for such a serious crime. Agent Rodriguez personally delivered the arrest warrant for Emma's murder charges, and she explained that Emma would be transferred from federal prison to a maximum security facility where defendants facing life sentences were housed. The comfortable minimum security prison where Emma had been serving her money laundering sentence would be replaced by harsh conditions designed for the most dangerous criminals in the federal system. Emma's reaction to the murder charges was reportedly complete denial and claims that the evidence had been fabricated by federal investigators seeking to enhance their prosecution statistics. She refused to accept responsibility for Dad's death, just as she had refused to acknowledge her financial crimes, maintaining her pattern of manipulation and self-deception even when faced with overwhelming evidence of her guilt. The murder charges against Emma attracted significant media attention throughout Colorado, transforming her from a minor white-collar criminal into a notorious killer who had murdered her own father for money. Morrison Construction received dozens of interview requests from journalists seeking information about Emma's childhood and family background. I declined all media interviews, choosing to protect our family's privacy during this horrific period. Lisa's support during the revelation of Dad's murder was unwavering and essential for my emotional survival. She helped me understand that my grief over Dad's death was valid regardless of how he had died, and that learning about Emma's role in his death didn't diminish the love and respect I had for Dad or the positive memories of our relationship. Lisa's perspective helped me separate my feelings about Dad from my rage toward Emma. The corruption investigation that had been ongoing for several years was concluded shortly after Emma's murder charges were filed. Morrison Construction received $2.8 million in restitution from the participants in the bid-rigging conspiracy, representing partial compensation for the projects Dad had lost due to criminal activities by his competitors. The financial recovery was substantial, but felt insignificant compared to the loss of Dad's life. Morrison Construction's reputation within Denver's business community was enhanced, rather than damaged, by the revelation of Emma's crimes. Many clients and competitors expressed admiration for how I had handled the successive crises of Emma's financial crimes and the discovery of Dad's murder. Our commitment to ethical business practices and cooperation with law enforcement had demonstrated the integrity that Dad had instilled in Morrison Construction's operations. Lisa and I were married in a small ceremony at Chapter and Verse 6 months after Emma's murder charges were filed. We had originally planned a larger celebration, but the discovery of Dad's murder had made elaborate festivities seem inappropriate. Our wedding was attended by Morrison Construction's employees, several of Dad's longtime friends, and Lisa's family members who had traveled from other states to celebrate with us. Our honeymoon was a working trip to New Zealand, where we studied innovative construction techniques and sustainable business practices that could be implemented at Morrison Construction. The trip represented our shared commitment to continuing Dad's legacy while building something new together. Lisa's input helped me develop expansion plans that honored Dad's values while incorporating modern approaches to community development and environmental responsibility. Emma's murder trial began 2 years after the charges were filed, and the prosecution's case was comprehensive and devastating. The evidence included Emma's detailed records of her murder plot, testimony from Dr. Morrison about his illegal collaboration with Emma, and forensic analysis of Dad's medical records, showing the systematic poisoning that had caused his death. Emma's defense attorneys had no viable strategy for contesting such overwhelming evidence. I testified at Emma's murder trial about Dad's final months, and the changes in his condition that I had attributed to natural disease progression. Learning that Dad's suffering had been caused by Emma's deliberate poisoning rather than natural illness made his death even more tragic, and my memories of caring for him during his final weeks more painful. Emma showed no emotion during my testimony, maintaining her pattern of complete detachment from the consequences of her actions. Emma was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The judge emphasized that her murder of Dad represented one of the most callous and calculated crimes he had encountered during his judicial career. Emma's willingness to kill her own father for financial gain demonstrated a complete absence of human decency that warranted the harshest possible punishment. Emma's conviction and life sentence provided a sense of justice for Dad's murder, but it could not restore the time that had been stolen from him or repair the family relationships that Emma had destroyed through her criminal behavior. Dad would have been proud of Morrison Construction's success and our commitment to ethical business practices, but he would never have the opportunity to see the positive impact of his life's work on Denver's community. Morrison Construction continued growing and prospering under the principles Dad had established, and that Lisa and I were committed to maintaining. We had expanded into sustainable construction techniques and community development projects that served low-income families throughout the Denver metropolitan area. Our success was built on the reputation for integrity that Dad had spent 40 years developing, and that Emma had briefly threatened but ultimately strengthened through her crimes. Lisa's pregnancy was confirmed 3 years after Emma's conviction, and we began planning for a family that would continue Dad's legacy in ways that Emma had made impossible through her criminal behavior. Our child would grow up knowing stories about their grandfather's integrity and community service, but they would never know their aunt, who had chosen greed and murder over family loyalty and ethical behavior. Chapter and Verse had become one of Denver's most successful independent bookstores, hosting community events that brought together business leaders, artists, and families from diverse backgrounds. Lisa's vision for the bookstore as a community resource had been realized beyond our initial expectations, and her success complemented Morrison Construction's growth in ways that honored both our individual talents and our shared values. Emma's life sentence meant that she would die in prison, separated forever from the family and community she had betrayed through her criminal actions. Her choice to murder Dad for money had eliminated any possibility of redemption or forgiveness, and her legacy would be defined by greed and violence rather than the positive contributions she could have made using her intelligence and education. The inheritance dispute that had brought Emma and me to Marcus Chen's law office had been resolved through federal prosecution rather than family negotiation. Emma had lost everything she had tried to claim, and had gained a life sentence that would ensure she never benefited from her crimes. The paper I had shown her that day had indeed brought response teams storming in, but the ultimate revelation of her evil went far beyond financial crimes to the murder of the man who had given her life and opportunity. Morrison Construction's future was secured not through Emma's schemes, but through commitment to the values Dad had taught and the community relationships he had built. Lisa and I were building something together that honored Dad's memory while creating new opportunities for positive impact within Denver's construction industry and broader community. Our success was measured not just in financial terms, but in the trust and respect we had earned through ethical business practices and community service. As I locked the office on the 5th anniversary of Dad's death, I reflected on how completely Emma's evil had been exposed and justice had been served. Dad's murder would never be forgotten or forgiven, but his legacy lived on through Morrison Construction's continued success and the values that Lisa and I were passing on to the next generation. Emma's choices had led her to life imprisonment, while our choices had led us to a future filled with love, purpose, and the satisfaction of work that made our community stronger. The family betrayal that had begun with financial crimes had ultimately revealed murder, but it had also demonstrated the power of integrity and justice to overcome even the most heinous criminal behavior. Dad's death had been avenged, his legacy had been preserved, and his values continued guiding Morrison Construction toward a future he would have been proud to see. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.